I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us. And I'll just say, Juliana, that this is informal conversation, and we can stop and you can interrupt me and whatever. It's all good. And the purpose of the conversation is to communicate whatever you think is most important to communicate, whatever your message is you want people to hear, and I think I know what it is, but I kind of want to learn with you. So it's an informal, fun conversation, hopefully. And I'm so grateful to meet you. You did a keynote at Learning Forward, I think, is where either Learning Forward and I said to my friend Aaron, I had to leave because I was going somewhere. I couldn't see it. And Aaron's the conference program director. I said, go see Juliana because she lives in Arizona. It'd be wonderful to have someone from Arizona who could present. And I've heard she's great. And like 5 minutes into your presentation, she said, we have to sign her up today. She's fantastic. So we're so honored you're coming.
Oh, that's really, really sweet. That was a special conference. That was a really special conference. And, part of my public speaking is being able to connect to the audience. And it was a very big audience to connect to, but there was such great energy in the room. That goes up there in the top 5.
Oh, we want to get up to the top 3. So
there we go.
We think our conference is extremely special because it's filled with coaches. And so coaches are people who love to learn. And they really believe in relationship. And so they're kind of really forgiving. They're like, oh, I had that experience. So you feel safe as a presenter and you get this warmth back from the audience and they're all curious and interested. Yeah. And they build, over the time of the conference, they build this real sense of community. It's a privilege to be a part of that community. And then many of our presenters have said, I've just never had that kind of experience. So it's really, you should just have fun and share your message and know they're gonna love you. I can guarantee you, they're gonna absolutely love your message. So I have a biography, and I wouldn't ordinarily do this, but there are so many things you've done, and I want to make sure I don't miss any. So I'm going to read this little biography just to sort of introduce things, and then we'll dive into the conversation. So here's what I'd like to say. It's Juliana Urtubey, National Board Certified Teacher. She was the 2021 National Teacher of the Year. And she uses her platform to advocate for, and I love this phrase, joyous and just education for all students, one that's inclusive and celebratory of students' identities, families, communities. A bilingual first-generation immigrant, Juliana has worked throughout her teaching career to serve as a mirror for school community, helping students to be proud of their identities and families, and to acknowledge their strengths and contributions to the community. And I am an immigrant as well, so we have 2 immigrants on this conversation. I came from the North. Your family came from the South. While teaching in Las Vegas, students gave her the nickname Ms. Earth for her efforts to beautify schools and unify the community through murals and gardens. With great pride, Juliana has coined the term linguistically gifted to honor the incredible linguistic gifts her students and their families contribute to school communities. Juliana currently leads professional development for educators in Arizona. She's the beloved Miss Appleberry on the early childhood learning show Coco Melon Classroom. She's got a bachelor's degree in bilingual elementary education, a master's degree in special bilingual education from the University of Arizona. September 2022, President Biden appointed you to the President's Advisory Committee on Advancing Educational Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunities. On the National Board Professional Teaching Standards Board of Directors, on the understood.org expert. She's been on the cover of People magazine, representing educators in 2021. I hope you've got pictures of that People magazine all over your home. Featured on Telemundo's 2022 Hispanic Heritage Celebration, was selected as the Mujer Imparable by the network's initiative to celebrate Latinas who are breaking barriers, changing the game. National Teacher of the Year 2021, and you shared your joyous and just message with thousands of people at the White House, Harvard, Stanford University, Good Morning America, The Today Show, Univision, El Espectador, Colombia's Al País, and at the Coaching Conversations podcast. So I'm so thrilled you're here. I'm grateful like you wouldn't believe. So thank you.
Jim, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
I've shared quite a bit about your background. Could you add a little bit to it so people who may not know you know about your background, and in particular, what sort of inspired you to become the educator you've become?
Yeah, absolutely. If I trace back um, my path to becoming a teacher and educator, I think I had it in me since I was really young. My parents will talk about how I was always buddied up with, the kids in class who just needed a little bit of extra help. Once I had learned English, I was always buddied up with the kids who were new to the country. And I love serving as a translator, both of language and culture. I also really loved working with the students in our class that had special needs and were part of our class through inclusion programs. And I think I learned a lot about humility, a lot about the power of learning, but most importantly, the power of togetherness. And so I grew up. And in high school, I had a coach who ran a teacher's program. It was an elective in class. And in our senior year, he asked me to be a part of it. And I hadn't really given teaching much thought, but he tapped me on the shoulder and I enrolled in this class. And for half the day, a couple times a week, I would get to go to the local elementary school and just co-teach with the teachers there. And I absolutely loved it. I also noticed that I was the only person on campus that spoke the same languages as most of the students, that
Hmm.
reflected the students' ethnicity. And I realized that there was a huge need for people like me to become part of the educational field to really build bridges.
Very cool. Tell me about your journey from that starting point. Well, first off, what was it that made you say, I think education is what I want to do?
I think it's the way that I felt when I was in conversation with students.
Hmm.
Um, I learned along the way that pedagogy is an art, but it's also a science. And so I knew it would be something that would be intellectually stimulating. But at the end of the day, I think what really lit my fire was this power of community within a school. You have the teachers and the students, but you also have the students' families and then the neighborhood where their school is. And it's just the perfect place to really build a thriving community.
Well, yes. Well, that's what we're going to see at TLC. It's going to be, we're a thriving community. Truly, it's beautiful how communities emerge, sometimes even just a matter of days, but sometimes over years too, So that's really what makes it such a joy. And you're a big part of our people are going to love you and they're going to love your message. And it's going to be such a validation. I'm so excited about it. But I better talk about the podcast. And so my next question would be, can you say anything about the journey to becoming the 2021 Teacher of the Year? First off, you were just checking it out and didn't know if you were going to be a teacher. And then suddenly you're in the White House as the Teacher of the Year.
Yeah, that was quite a journey. So let's see. I started teaching in Arizona, and I taught in bilingual programs. And during this time, the English only proposition came through. And as a bilingual teacher, this really shook things up, and made it really difficult to be a bilingual teacher in Arizona. Now you fast forward, the path hasn't been easy, but there's a lot of thriving bilingual programs in Arizona, regardless of what's currently happening. And I really learned about the need for advocacy in education. So when I moved to Las Vegas, I picked a school that I knew would mirror my own experiences. So it was in downtown Las Vegas. Most of the families were first generation like me, right? So you had a lot of families from the Philippines, from Vietnam, from Central and South America, really hardworking, diverse families. And I was just excited to be a part of it. And I remember I was walking down the hallway one day with my principal who said that she got an email about a grant opportunity and she asked me if I would want to do it. And I asked her what it was for, and she said it was for a garden. And we happened to be around a place of really just kind of unused turf and lot in our school. And our school wasn't the most beautiful. You would hear teachers say things like, please don't stay here after dark. It's not safe. I lived up the street. I thought it was very safe. I saw, the beauty in the potential of the school. So without any gardening skills, I told my principal, yes, let's go for it. And so we did. And we built this tiny little garden with this tiny little grant. But then I started taking my students out there. And I'm a special education resource teacher at this point. And I started to see how my students flourished outside through learning by playing and being intuitive and seeking patterns in the natural world. My students with special educational needs started flourishing. And so I said, there's something to this. And so we brought in a bunch of other teachers to help us grow the program. And if you fast forward 8, 9 years later, we had a 20,000 square foot garden
Mm.
for our preschoolers, for the native pollinators, for just, there was room for everybody. And we started a garden club. It was quite magical. We called ourselves the Gnomies. We're gnomes who are homies. We're Gnomies. Uh, and it was just so fun. It was a beautiful way to bring people together. So in 2019, when I saw that I was nominated for Nevada Teacher of the Year, I was quite reluctant. I didn't really know what that would mean, but I was encouraged by my community to really use this opportunity to talk about the lessons we learned together in building this garden. So it was never quite about me, which I think was what gave me the courage to really push forward. And then before you know it, I was selected as one of the 4 finalists. And I had to really dig deep because when you're a finalist, you have to go on behalf of a community or a committee and present what would be, what they like to call your body of work or your platform. What are you going to spend the year talking about? And I talked about the lessons I learned from my students and how that gave birth to this idea, this framework of a joyous and just education. And here we are. I'm still talking about it. I never get tired talking about it. Every time I talk about my students, just my heart flutters and it reminds me why we do what we do.
Well, it seems like garden is a good metaphor for what I hear in your work of taking something that was overlooked and seeing its potential for beauty and then watching it grow and flourish. That's a pretty cool metaphor.
And, there's something really cool about gardens.
Mhm.
Gardens, are beautiful spaces. You're constantly surrounded by butterflies and bees and birds. But gardens really, their magic is in bringing people together.
Mm.
You learn a lot of lessons in the garden. The first and foremost is that there's enough for everybody always. And that all work in the garden is of equal value. So when you have families that come from first generational backgrounds, maybe English isn't their language of choice, maybe they haven't had enough time to master it. In a garden, it doesn't seem to matter, right? These power
Mm.
structures that are sometimes barrier to entry into being part of a community are erased in a garden. And I think that that's what motivated us so much to really keep building the garden.
Mm. I knew a teacher years ago, and her nickname was she was Miracle Grow for students. So there's an extension of your metaphor. She's like Miracle Grow for kids, they said.
Yeah,
Um,
that's awesome.
although Miracle Grow is probably filled with toxic stuff, but she was like the organic, healthy version of Miracle Grow.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, did your upbringing, your life growing up, did that affect who you became and how you ended up being who you are?
Oh, absolutely. And I think this is true for all of us, right?
Mhm.
You talk to teachers across the country and you ask them, why are you an educator? And you love to hear the stories about people who had teachers in their family or teachers who believed in them and transformed their lives. You love to hear those stories. And then you also understand the people who have the opposite side of the story. They have a teacher who didn't believe in them. And that propelled them so much to want to be a different kind of teacher. So I think we all are really informed by our own schooling and our own upbringing in how we show up in the classroom and educational spaces. For me, my parents just are lovely, incredible people who really always encouraged us to speak Spanish at home. Spanish was the language we spoke, and it was a way to preserve not just our identity, but to preserve our connection to each other. And so I was really motivated by that to ensure other students could have more than one language. For me, it's never made sense why sometimes people operate in this country as if we want to be a monolingual country. We don't. There's so much linguistic diversity in this country that deserves to be nurtured. And so I think I grew up with that kind of fire, that advocacy, and wanting to build spaces where that could become a reality.
You talk a lot about, and beautifully, the concept of joy. And I'm wondering, when you use that, we all use that word. Do you have a definition for joy? What joy means to you?
I do. For me, I think that it was really, really important to make sure that joy was always embraced by the justice part, right? I remember sometimes it's happened to me a few times that I'll get school districts or organizations that say, "Hey, Juliana, we'd love to have you come speak to, our audience, our community. We really love the joy part, but could you just leave the justice part at home? It really doesn't work with what we're doing here." And I have to really kindly remind them that you can't have my joy without the justice, right? These two things are interwoven because they balance each other out. So, you'll hear a lot of grassroots organizers talk about this concept of a closed fist, open fist, right? With one hand, you welcome others and you do the work of community building, of nurturing, of art, right? And with another, you advocate for what you want to see in this world, what you want to create and build, right? And the two go hand in hand. So for me, joy is really about collectively building a deeply rooted, authentic belonging. So joy is different than happiness because happiness is fleeting, but joy is internal. It's this awareness that you know who you are within the community, and you know that everybody in your community has access to this joy, right? And and the joy really grows when we nurture our full identities and possibilities, right? So students, especially students who look like me and have had similar experiences to me, might feel this way in school, but then feel this way differently when they're not in school because maybe their family isn't treated with dignity, right? And so somehow there's a wedge that's put between them and their family, right? For me, joy is acknowledging that we all have strengths and gifts to offer, and that we have a place to do it. And then just similarly, just as being real with our students. Look, it's saying, yes, the world sometimes feels upside down and heavy, here in our classroom, here in our school, we can design the world that we know to be what we all need. So for me, justice is really about growing a world that's gentle and fierce at the same time. And it's gentle and fierce enough to hold our dreams, right? And here's the most important part, while we're building it collectively.
I keep wanting to say that's just like what we do, but I'm gonna keep the focus on you.
But
But
that's the beauty, Jim. That's the
right.
beauty is that when you work in communities, very similar values and principles surface. When you work in spaces that are really trying to bring out the best in everybody and give belonging absolutely unequivocally to everybody, we see these tenets rise up no matter what, which is what's so beautiful because that means our work connects.
Hmm. Having some commitment to something that's a greater good, whether it's, you could call it collective efficacy or shared purpose or a sense of why we're here, that takes the focus off of me and it puts it more on, if it's in a school, it's quite likely kids. My favorite collaborators are John Campbell and Christian Van Noorenberg, both who are experts at coaching. We disagree all the time, but the disagreements are good. The little frictions we have, because if all we did was agree, we wouldn't be learning from each other. Our disagreements help us learn and grow, and we are grateful for those disagreements because there's a higher order. It's not about I have to get my way. It's like, how can we come up with the best possible chapter or article or whatever we're trying to do? So when you have that larger purpose, and of course you want mutual respect and affection, those are really integral parts of my relationship with John and Christian too. I really respect them and their gifts in my life, but I do think that purpose is a key thing, because you can get lost in, oh, I didn't get credit for this, or they're working harder than I'm working harder than they are, or, you can get, there's some element of that that's true, but still you want the purpose, the focus to be on what's our real reason for being here? What's our purpose? Does that resonate with you as true in your experience?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I taught teacher residents for a couple semesters recently, and there was so much uncertainty in their work, right? So they were second career teachers who were coming into the classroom for a full year of practicum while they were taking all of their grad classes. And so
Mm.
there was just a lot of uncertainty. And I think that the message that most supported them through this was this idea of reflection over perfection. And, when I think about mentoring and coaching, that's the center part of it all, which is the reflection. How do we do this reflection together and have a clarity of purpose? The garden is a perfect example for collective purpose. It's really clear what you're doing. You're growing a bunch of good stuff, right? You're creating a beautiful space. You're bringing people together. The purpose is really clear. And I think sometimes we feel that it has to be complicated to be important, but I have found the opposite. I have found that sometimes the most simple, down to earth concepts are the ones that keep us the most united on our purpose.
Hmm. I think that's a good point. Can you paint a picture of what it would look like? Some small example or big example of what just and joyous or joyous and just would look like? What would it look like if that was the case?
So I'm going to tell you something that my students often told me in my class was, what do you want? What do you mean? Like, how do I do that? And I've never been the kind of teacher to say, this is what this needs to look like, or here's 100 requirements for this essay, right? On the contrary, I want to create learning environments and learning activities that are so open-ended that people's creativity gets ignited and who they are comes through. So I think that something very similar happened with this framework that I've designed, which is the Joyous and Just framework, right? Is people are curious how in actuality that comes out. Well, for me, it's about having collective, like you said, purpose, collective. For me, I call them promesas, which are promises that I make to my
Hmm.
learning communities, or you could call them pillars, values, principles, whatever works best for you. For me, I have 5, and a lot of the work goes in the design part of the learning. So when you are designing for learning, I ask people to do 5 things. And most often I find that these are 5 things people are already doing, but having that vocabulary, having that anchor really helps us. And so in my school, it was a garden, but I'll often tell people in your school it could look very differently. I've seen this come out through robotics program. I've seen this look come out in family English classes. I've seen this come out in many, many, many different ways. I'm currently collaborating with my dear friend John Arthur from Utah, who is a finalist with me and the 2021 Utah State Teacher of the Year. And he's paired his students with high schoolers to design collective wellness projects. So the glue that holds Joyous and Just together and the 5 promesas is this idea that we're doing this work for collective wellness on all the levels, for all the people, right? And so his high schoolers are supporting his 5th and 6th graders as they investigate ways to bring collective justice and collective wellness to their communities. And in 2 weeks, I get to go in and help give feedback to the student presentations, and I'm so excited, right? And so that's one way to bring this forward. So I'll quickly share the 5 promesas, and
Yeah,
if we're
please.
gonna dive into any of them, we can.
Right.
The first is making room for reflection. I have noticed, and as a national board certified teacher, that reflection is often the thing that gets wiped off real quick when we don't have time. But the growth is in reflection. So making room for reflection, making room for the voices to give that reflection is front and foremost. The second is actively growing this collective wellness, right? What are the verbs and what are the actionable pieces of your learning design that bring collective wellness? Third is recognizing brilliance. And so this is turning off your blinders for things that you might be missing. I often tell educators that we have to earn our students and their families' trust. We can't just expect that because we're their teachers, they're going to tell us their stories and they're going to tell us pieces of themselves that'll help us be better teachers to them, right? We
Right.
had to really go through this process of earning their stories. And for me, recognizing brilliance is recognizing gifts and strengths in not just my students, but their families too. And
Hmm.
this is where this idea of linguistically gifted came up, right? I myself was labeled an English language learner for the very longest time, and I, to this day, that term just feels like a sweater that got passed down to you that's a couple sizes too small. It just
Hmm.
doesn't quite fit. And I've seen a lot of districts and a lot of schools across I don't know, last 5, 10 years shift this to multilingual and other things, and that's great. but we also have to be building a world where kids can use those gifts. So that's the recognizing brilliance. The fourth one is valuing intergenerational learning. It's seeing our students' family members as people that we can learn from, not just people that we got to teach about how to better teach math or reading at home, but how do we learn from them and their experiences to make our schools better? And the last one is designing for collaboration, not compliance. So designing learning systems that really ask our entire communities to collaborate to bring them forward.
Can you just give us a couple examples of where it's worked, schools you've worked with, where you've seen this? And now your first story of the garden in the school you worked in and that transformation and how it transformed not just the space, but the people who created the space and what happened in the space. But maybe one or two other examples of places where even just one would be great.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think this idea of designing for collaboration, not compliance, has really helped teachers rethink a lot of things. Um, I often talk about compliance having a need in schools, right? I'm a special education teacher, and look, I complied to that paperwork. I made sure it was on time. That we got all the notices out, that all the signatures were there, all that stuff. There's a place for compliance, but when we're working directly with children, what would happen if we designed for collaboration? And so I've often worked with students or with teachers who have students who have, significant behavioral needs in the classroom. And I've walked them through the process of building systems of collaboration, not compliance in terms of their behavioral design. So looking at things like, for example, behavior charts. Behavior charts, have gotten a lot of revision lately, which is good because we don't necessarily just want to force kids to behave in a certain way, especially if that way isn't necessarily serving their learning. So, looking for ways that that child can really inform, the the embrace of what it is to have a behavioral plan, looking at the behavioral plan through an asset mindset versus a deficit mindset. And so I've seen the way teachers have shifted in the way they talk about their students once they begin to collaborate versus once they have a set of goals that they expect the child to comply in. And it's not only the teacher who shifts, the child shifts. I was doing a behavior observation for a school not too long ago, and I noticed in the physicality of how this child walked through the hallways. Before, this child would walk, kind of hunched over, not making a whole lot of eye contact. And now this child walks upright like a sunflower, making contact with other people and sharing their warmth with other people. And I think that the way we talk to people and about people really shifts how they show up in our spaces.
Well, it's kind of how we work with teachers. We talk about the partnership approach, positioning ourselves as collaborators, and then in that partnership approach, it starts with the voice of the other person. We share our ideas when it helps the other person think better, but we don't necessarily share just to share. And we would say that change happens from the inside out, not from the outside in. That if you tell the person you have to do that, that's a guarantee. The best you can hope for is compliance. But if you can figure out what they really want to work on, and you start there, you're going to get a deep level of commitment. So for us, our way of describing what we do is keep kids first. Start with the changes in kids, what do the kids need, and then the professional learning should be driven by what the teacher perceives, maybe in partnership with the coach, but you want to work on the thing the teacher thinks about when they drive home at night or when they wake up in the middle of the night. And it's going to be something to do with engagement or well-being or learning of the students. And so that's sounds quite similar to your idea. I love your way of expressing it, of putting focus on collaboration and not compliance. Because we could say, in our opinion, compliance isn't going to get you very far. There's things you have to, you can't say, I'd like to put a little wine cooler in my classroom. I think it's probably, you can't, that's going to go against compliance. And you can't say, I really don't want to start teaching before 11. No, there's things in any community, there are things you have to do. But when it comes to professional practice, to involve the kids and get them expressing what they need and understanding and seeing the students, seeing all students in the way you said, we'll call it being a witness for the good. And then, seeing what all is happening and then starting there, that in our experience is that was what makes coaching powerful is when you start with the change the teacher sees that their kids most need. Start with kids, good things will happen. It's the way we see it. I wanted to just give a chance for you to say just a few things. Here's what I want. I'm just going to cut right to the chase. I want you to help me have a more joyful life. So it could be joy in my life, or it could be joy in the classroom. So if you got any words or ideas or strategies or techniques that can increase the amount of joy that people listening would experience.
Yes. So I really hope that this will be helpful, because joy doesn't live in a vacuum. It's not by itself. Joy is connected to absolutely every part of your life, meaning that trying to be joyful is not trying to be less of the other things that we are. Sometimes we have a right to be enraged.
Right.
And there's a certain joy to that, right? Because on the other side of that, through that is joy. I think we have to release this idea that joy means happiness, right? To me, joy means carving the space out for yourself to be who you are. So when you are being yourself, when you are showing up for the people in your community, that's joy. There's this really beautiful person. Her name is Mariam Kaba. She does abolition work in prisons with women who found themselves there because of domestic abuse issues. And she wrote this. She wrote this beautiful book. And in the foreword of this book, that somebody else wrote, they said, why be a star when you can be a constellation? And that's what this person does. And so I really look to this person for how they define joy, right? And joy for them is not an emotion, right? Joy is an action. Joy is the things you do for yourself and for others. And so I think we feel this pressure to find joy sometimes everywhere we go. It's kind of what you were saying before about this ability of teachers to get themselves through challenges. They need mentors to maybe ask the right questions to help them point to certain answers and questions, but ultimately the answers are within them, right? It's the same thing for joy. It's ultimately within us when we show up as our fullest selves, right? And so there's no tips and tricks other than just constantly being clear in what joy means for you, right? And for me, I feel the most joyful when I'm working with young ones, when I'm working with students, when I'm watching them tackle a problem together, or when I'm listening to them play on the playground. That's when I'm most joyful. So I know that my work takes me to building spaces for young ones to really self-realize. So I hope that that's not a heartbreaking definition for you, but I really think that having that kind of perspective on joy helps us be joyful regardless of the outside noise, regardless of the outside politics, the outside challenges that are ever present, right? Joy is being in community and being yourself.
Joy is being community and being yourself. Don't be a star, be a constellation. If I'm a person listening to this and I'm not feeling joy, what do you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, that's often.
I mean, the whole podcast is about that. The whole podcast has been about that. But like, what's one next step I could take? What's one thing I could do to open up the possibility to become a constellation, or to open up the possibility to be my truest version of myself?
You said it right there. It's find your constellation. I think that community is the recipe for joy. Being part of one community, many communities, knowing your place and your role and your value and your contribution within that community, to me, that's joy. I'll tell you that the biggest wave of the garden that we got built was 2016 to 2020. That doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot of fear amongst the first generation undocumented community that I served. It just means that we had a place to come together, to shield each other from that, even if it's momentarily, but to build something together. That community coming together was my joy, right? And even though I don't live there anymore, even though I'm not constantly growing that garden anymore, that's still a catalyst for my joy when I find myself not being joyful,
Mhm.
right? The thing about joy is you got to trust that it's always going to come back to you. And remember what Mariam Kappa said is joy is in the action. Joy is in what you do with others.
Mm. So it would seem to me, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going way off my script of what I wanted to talk about, but I'm so fascinated by what you're saying. So I hope you forgive me if it's not helpful. But it seems to me when you build your when you build your communities, you must come from a place of saying, I'm looking for the good in that other person, that I know there's good in there and I want to see it. And looking for the good, you find it. And then, and because if the first thing you do is, oh, they don't think the way I think, or they don't dress the way I do, or they don't talk the way I do. We're different in all these ways. It's hard to build community. But if you can see the light inside the other person and show it back to them, now you've got a chance to build community. Is that accurate, do you think?
That's absolutely accurate. That's recognizing brilliance, right?
Right.
And within recognizing brilliance, I think of the concept of linguistically gifted, right? I was able to look at another student who had different but similarities to my story, and I'll tell the story at the keynote, so I won't
Yeah, we'll see.
ruin the surprise now. But this student inspired me to say, "Hey, you're not an English language learner. You're linguistically gifted." And the shift that happened for that student is so critical. But guess what, Tim? A huge shift happened for me because
Mhm.
I now had a different set of words to describe my gifts. And these gifts are reciprocal. So I think a healthy part of being in community is this reciprocity in giving and getting, but also understanding that gifts aren't just a tangible thing you hand to somebody.
Right.
It's, when we think of the word gifted in education, we think of the kids who are high achievers, intellectually, very, very capable and gifted, right? But what if we were to think of this word as gift in a way of what that student can offer others in our community, in our learning spaces, in our classrooms? Right. That's absolutely a key part of this. Yeah, we have to recognize each other's brilliance. And as a mentor, right? Because this is a lot of the work that I do too, is you have to breed the conditions so that people can recognize their own brilliance, so that people can come into contact with their own brilliance, right? The student that I'll tell the story about later, she had no idea, but then her building from me, learning from her, and building a classroom where she could be herself let her come into her own brilliance, into her own gifts.
This is my last thought. But you reminded me of a story I learned from a friend of mine at university who's doing her doctorate. And she graduated, she did her PhD, and she dedicated her doctorate to one of her students. And she worked in special ed. She worked with kids with developmental disabilities. And she said, I was working with one of my students, and I said to him, and he asked me about what I was planning to do. And she said, well, I was thinking I might do a doctorate, but I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I'm smart enough to become a doctor. I don't know if I can do it. And the student whose IQ was, standard deviation below the norm, he looked at her and he said, oh, Mrs. So-and-so, you can do a doctor. You're a teacher. You can do anything. I thought, what a great story. And it sounds like that's at the heart of everything you're talking about. Look for the brilliance in other people. Create communities where that can happen. I'm so grateful for the conversation. I can't wait to meet you in Phoenix at TLC. Thank you so much. I love everything about what you're sharing.
Oh, thank you, Jim. I can't wait to meet you and the entire community in October. I'm going to be looking forward to it.
The other people are definitely the best part. It's
We're a constellation, Jim.
we're a constellation. That's it. I'm gonna keep that word going. That's such a great phrase. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jim.